Back when my mother was about 18, she was visited by what she calls the tapper. Every night for 3 months, someone would tap on the window of the room she was in as soon as she was alone, every single night without fail. As soon as anyone else came into the room or went outside to investigate, it would stop, and no one would be outside. My grandpa and both uncles were living in the house too. After 3 months of this, the tapping stopped. My grandpa and both uncles decided to take off fishing one night. The tapping hadn't happened in 2 weeks at that point, and my mum stayed behind. The sun had just gone down and my mum was sitting in the living room reading, and then it happens. She assumes it's my younger uncle because he's a joker. Jesse, knock it off. Jesse, it's not funny, just get inside. She gets up from the couch and goes to the window, which still has the curtains drawn. Very funny, Jesse. She then taps on the window through the curtain. Instead of tapping, it sounds like a hand slams against the window in response. She goes back to the couch, still convinced it's my uncle. And almost immediately, the phone rings. My grandpa is calling her from the neighbor's house to tell her they stopped in to say hey, and the neighbors offered to help them dress the fish. Well, take Jesse back there with you and make him stop slamming on the windows. Rhonda, Jesse's here with us. She runs to the front door and locks it, leaving the phone off of the hook. My grandpa says they're coming over and hangs up. It takes them about a minute to run up the road from the neighbors. When they get there, they see a guy standing by the front window in the bushes. He stands up when they start screaming at him and takes off towards the fence. This guy looks like he's about a good 7 feet tall from what my grandpa told me. They chase him to the property line where a wooden fence separates from the next neighbor's property, and he jumps over the fence, which is 7 feet high. No hands, legs completely over the top. They clamber over the fence to keep chasing him, and he can't be more than 1 or 2 seconds ahead of the three of them. But then, he's gone. Straight up gone. The property on that side of the fence was just dirt and grass, no trees or buildings, and nothing else was around to hide in. They never heard the tapping or saw anyone that looked like this guy again. Back when I was 13, me, my 9-year-old nephew, and my 5-year-old niece were having a pillow fight in my room. I was standing at the foot of the bed with my nephew directly in front of me, and my niece was to the right side of the bed. Then, my nephew yelled out at us for all to stop and look, and I turned around and saw my bedroom doorknob slowly turning side to side. We just stood there and watched it for what felt like forever before I finally managed to work up the courage to reach out and open the door. The doorknob continued trying to move beneath my fingers, and only stopped once the door was completely open and there was no one in the small hallway in front of my door. I ran out to ask my sister and granny if they had been doing it, and of course, they said no. The 2 kids and I decided to have our pillow fight in the living room after that. Once my sister and her family had left, I came back to my room, and being the scientifically minded child I was, I began testing out every possible way that the doorknob could have acted on its own like that. It was a very hard to turn doorknob that I myself rarely got turned all the way, and I often had to open it for younger kids and my granny, as the mechanisms were rusted inside. It would also not turn on the inside if you turned the knob on the outside. In the end, I concluded something had to have been moving the doorknob physically, and it also would have had to have been directly beside me. When I was just under 2 years old, we started renting a crappy tiny little house out in the boonies. Shortly after we moved in, I started having awful nightmares, something I'd never suffered from before. I would wake up screaming, "Fireman! Fireman!" and point out the window. Obviously, since we were in a tiny town in the middle of nowhere, there were no firemen outside, nor did my parents recall me ever being scared by sirens, fires, or firemen before. The nightmares and fear were new and inexplicable. We moved a lot back then and did not live in the house for more than 5 or 6 months, but I had the nightmares consistently the whole time we lived there. Years later, we moved again to another town 30 minutes or so away from my old house. My mum stayed friendly with several people from the small town we moved from and was visiting with one of them. Somehow the topic turned to the house we rented, and my mum mentioned how it hadn't been a great place to live for a lot of reasons, but she also happened to mention my nightmares. The woman she was visiting was horrified and proceeded to tell my mum that the previous owner of that home had been a raging alcoholic who had either accidentally or intentionally set himself on fire after building a campfire in the side yard. He had died from the injuries. The place where he had burned to death was the same place I pointed to every time I had the nightmare. I wasn't terrified of firemen, I was terrified of the fireman. Me and a few of my friends were going to a party out in the middle of nowhere. We got lost on this long country road. We would drive for 20 minutes and not see a gas station or a house, and then this ambulance comes out of nowhere and flies past us. One of the doors comes open and a small cooler comes out, rolling out the back and almost hits us. So we turn around and stop to look for the cooler. We find it half open with some ice dumped on the ground. We open it and find an entire human finger. Obviously we start panicking. We close the cooler and go about 80 miles per hour trying to get up with that ambulance. We stop at a gas station to call 911 and we explain to the dispatcher what just happened. The dispatcher starts yelling at us for playing a prank. We're a little confused, so we ask her why she thinks we're playing a prank with her. She says because we don't have any ambulances out there. We are floored by what she just said, so we start thinking there's a mix-up on her end. We drive to the closest hospital in the area and hand over the finger, but they have no patient with a missing finger. The hospital calls the police and we all give a statement and then go home. About a week later, the detective calls and gives me the biggest shock of my life. He says that they never found the ambulance or the person missing the finger. They checked the dispatching records and no emergency vehicles were ever out that night. Me and my mum were watching TV in the living room one sunny day, with the large balcony sliding glass door and shades wide open. There's not a cloud in the sky and the sun is shining brightly. And then everything turns black. Pitch black. Not really cloudy or dark or nighttime dark. I mean black as in complete and utter lack of any type of light whatsoever. This includes the TV itself, no light from anywhere. Both me and my mother scream, and just as quickly as it disappeared, the light has returned. It was only gone for perhaps 2 or 3 seconds, but we both experienced this, so it wasn't like I suddenly went temporarily blind or something like that. But that isn't the only weird part. The sky is a blanket of dark clouds and is now pouring rain. The rain only lasts for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then the sky slowly begins to return to bright sunshine. Nobody else that we know experienced the darkness, but a friend of ours did notice that almost instantly, the beautiful weather turned terrible without notice. We even checked if there was an eclipse or something happening that day, but no. As far as any official news sources were concerned, no eclipses or bizarre weather happened that day.